We are in Europe during World War I.
Actually, we're on a map of Europe from World War I.
Today we're going to be learning all about World War I.
We're going to take you back 100 years in time.
We're also going to take a look at the amazing World War I airplanes on display here at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum's Stephen F. Udvar Hazy Center.
And our middle school friends here, they're going to take a virtual ride on a World War I airplane.
This is STEM in 30.
Here is a map of Europe in 1914, when World War I started. A lot has changed in the past 100 years. Europe had large empires that spread across many modern-day countries in Europe and across the world. Some countries you would know today, like Poland, Ukraine, or Turkey, didn't even exist at the start of the war. Before the war, these empires began signing treaties and entering alliances with each other, just in case war broke out. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Italy signed a treaty called the Triple Alliance. Meanwhile, Russia had relations with Serbia and entered into trade agreements with France and the United Kingdom. You would think all these alliances would be good, but all it did was to cause these two groups to butt heads with each other. These tensions boiled over with the assassination of the future Emperor of Austria-Hungary, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife, by a Serbian nationalist. The assassination of the Archduke causes the Austro-Hungarian Empire to declare war on Serbia. Russia backs Serbia against Austria-Hungary. Honoring their treaty, France backs Russia. France mobilizes its troops on the German border. The German Empire backs Austro-Hungarian Empire and, in an attempt to evade French forces, attacks France through neutral Belgium. The United Kingdom enters the war to defend Belgium. Instead of jumping into the war, Italy chooses to wait. Germany and Austro-Hungary become the Central Powers, while the United Kingdom, Russia, France, and Serbia are called Allied powers. But what makes this a world war? It starts with Japan. Eager to expand its territory and enter the world stage, Japan backs the Allied powers and begins attacking German islands in the Pacific Ocean. Soon, the Ottoman Empire backs the Central Powers. Italy backs the Allied powers. Bulgaria backs the Central Powers. Soon, the fighting in Europe is at a stalemate, with both sides locked in trench warfare. The United States stays out of the fighting. However, two events turn the American public in favor of entering the war on the Allied side. Without warning, a German U-boat sinks British passenger ship RMS Lusitania, killing 1,198 passengers, including 128 Americans. A telegraph from Germany to Mexico, called the Zimmermann Telegram, is intercepted by the British. This telegram announced Germany's planned unrestricted U-boat warfare and proposed an alliance between Germany and Mexico against the United States. 1 month after the Zimmermann Telegram is made public, the United States declares war on Germany in April 1917. By November 1918, the war is over with an Allied victory. In the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice is signed. Today, November 11th, is celebrated as Veterans Day.
You all did a great job. I learned so much about World War I. Come on in here, guys. Come on in.
We're going to take you guys back 100 years, and to do that, I have another special guest. Natalie, come on in. This is Natalie.
Hi, guys.
She is a reenactor. Natalie, do you want to tell us what a reenactor is?
Yeah, I do. So I'm a reenactor or historical interpreter. What I do is I dress up like someone from the past. I research a different time period, and I use costumes and props and my research to help me portray a different time period or a person. Some of the props I'm using today: old-fashioned glasses, an old-fashioned handkerchief, a letter that I'm going to read to you. In fact, why don't we head this way and I'll read this letter to you. What do you think? Ready?
Yep.
I just walked down the lane to the mailbox, and inside was a letter from my boy Paul. He's flying overseas for the American Expeditionary Forces. He loves flying. You know, Paul wanted to go fight 2 years ago, but I begged him not to. Because before America got into the war last year, any American that went and fought in France could lose their citizenship. I told him it wasn't worth the risk. He had a flight in an airplane a few years ago at the county fair, and that was all it took. Since 1914, he's read everything he could about the war. Every news article, every magazine story. He loves flying so much, the mere sight of an aeroplane sends his heart racing. I guess he was meant to fly. Here's his letter. June 19th, 1918. My dearest mother, I hope this letter finds you well. I am in Issoudun, France, at the American Aviation Center. I know that I do not need to tell you our location is confidential. I will see if I can capture it for you. There are piles of lumber everywhere. They're building constantly. It's lots of hustle and bustle and acres of mud all over. I'm comfortable here, and it's good to be busy after months of training. I'm eating well, so do not worry. Paul says, I'm glad I made it into the AEF after all the hurdles I had to face. Oh, Paul had a time getting into this fight. He had to write to the Secretary of War in Washington, D.C. You see, Paul went to the local recruiting office here, and he told them, I want to join the Air Service, and they said, it does not exist. Well, he knew that it did because of the stories he read. So he wrote to the Secretary of War, imagine that, to get into flight school. He eventually enlisted in the Signal Corps in the Aviation Division. He says, we had quite a sea voyage over here. We were warned about smoking and lighting matches. They told us before we left that any man who showed a light would be arrested as a spy on the voyage. Oh. I got to learn to fly in a plane called a Newport. They're very fast, and experienced pilots get to fly them. I was the first one to solo fly. My instructor said I was ready. I was so nervous, but I did it, Mother. I truly did. The instructor started the engine, and then he held up his hands. That meant I was to take control. I guided the speeding plane across the field. I felt something inside of me sort of snap, and the feel of the airship came to me. It was unforgettable. As we soared into the air, we leveled out at about 1,000 feet up. Suddenly, something whipped my face. I could not see a thing. My eyes were blindfolded. Don't worry, Mother. It was the bib of my knitted helmet. Oh. I grabbed the end of it with my mouth and ended up clutching it in my teeth until I landed. I should say it gave me quite a start, but I was thrilled to be the first in my barracks to solo. One day, I was circling the field and I approached the edge of a road. There were 2 telephone poles about 50 feet apart. I thought I would fly between the poles. Well, that was a big mistake. I felt the impact as the Newport hit something. The plane was thrown on its side. I tried to right it, but the controls didn't respond. I cut the motor. Wham! What a crash! When I hit the ground, I saw wires wrapped around the propeller. So many wires. The ambulance arrived. It's always on the field, ready for action. And the field officer arrived on a motorcycle to see if I was okay. He asked me how it happened, and I said, no one told me there would be wires there. Who put them on the poles? I crawled out of the aircraft with some bruises, and they told me to report to hospital. Oh. But when I got there, the instructor said, Paul, I want you to take another aircraft up right now. I could hardly believe what I was hearing. My nerves were strained to the breaking point after the crash, but the instructor said, Paul, there won't be anyone to tell you that there are wires in battle. You'll just have to guess that they are there. I don't want you to lose your nerve. Go back up now. And I did. I went right back up. I think they were right. Remember when I was small and fell off my bicycle? I do. And Pa told me to get back on? It's the same thing, I guess. I next learned how to fly in a V formation. This is hard to do, but it's how a squadron keeps together in battle. Like how geese fly over the farm. Do you see how I mean, Mother? I do see, but it sounds frightening to me. He says they assigned me to the 1st Pursuit Group. Each pursuit group has 4 squadrons. I'm in the 95th Squadron. Our mascot is a donkey. They really have one on the base. I've seen it. Oh. And Quentin Roosevelt is in this squadron. He's a very nice fellow and a good pilot. Oh, my word. President Theodore Roosevelt's son is there. I'm flying Sopwith Camels now, the best there is. Our captain told me to take one up to get used to it the other day. I flew over the lines of the enemy with the other pilots. The anti-aircraft guns were peppering us, and I had to try to think straight while they fired at us. I had to watch for the enemy patrols and keep in contact with my fellow pilots. But the real excitement began later at about 2 o'clock in the morning. The enemy began bombarding, and we headed up in our planes. We circled for about an hour over a field. As I flew over the enemy line, I could see so many flashes here and there. The Archies, anti-aircraft fire, were firing endlessly. There was shrapnel bursting everywhere. My guns jammed at one point, but I twisted and dove, whirled around, and they never hit me. Although the concussion from the explosions would rock my plane a little. I made it back to the field all right. My next flight up was more exciting, but I didn't know how much more until I landed. I was in the air again, flying over the trenches, and I saw puffs of smoke, which I knew were tracer ammunition from an enemy plane. I fired my guns, and at first I thought I'd hit the enemy, but I wasn't sure as I had 2 holes in the wing of my plane and had to return to base. When I landed, everyone congratulated me. It seemed that I had hit the fuel tank of the German fighter and it went down in flames. Oh my word, holes in his wings. I hope that's the worst thing that happens to him. Don't worry about me, Mother. I shall be fine. I feel I'm truly doing my duty now that I've had some scuffles. Give my love to all. I will write soon. My official address is 95th Aero Squadron, 1st Pursuit Group, American Expeditionary Forces. With all my affection, your Paul.
Some of the things you never thought you'd know, we learned when researching this show. For example, pigeons were used during World War I.
In fact, pigeons during World War I were very important birds, and they sometimes parachuted pigeons into combat.
Check it out.
During World War I, finding out what was going on behind enemy lines was incredibly hard, but it offered huge advantages. Throughout the war, both sides came up with creative ways of gathering information. One particularly crazy method used by the British involved parachuting carrier pigeons behind enemy lines, with notes attached instructing civilians to send them back with information on German troop movements. As many as 16,000 pigeons were trained and deployed before the end of the war. This may seem like a bird-brained idea, but people during World War I were resourceful and creative when it came to ways of gaining the upper hand during the war.
Now I'm joined by Dr. Peter Jacob, who is the Chief Curator of the National Air and Space Museum. Thank you so much for being here, Peter.
My pleasure.
We are standing in front of one of the very important airplanes of World War I. Can you tell us what it is and why it was so important?
This airplane, beautiful airplane that it is called a Sopwith Camel. And that sounds like a funny name, doesn't it? Why would we call the airplane a camel? Well, actually, if you look at the airplane closely, you see the machine guns in the front, and they have this covering over it, a cowling over it. And if you look at the airplane from the side, it looks like it has a hump. So they called it the Camel. And it became one of the most famous airplanes in the First World War. The primary mission of a Sopwith Camel was a fighter airplane. In other words, fighting other airplanes in the air, dogfighting that you might call it. But it was also used for ground attack, and that was really the beginning of having airplanes and ground troops work together. So if you had an airplane that would come and strafe enemy troops on the ground, or it would be there to protect your own troops on the ground. So a ground attack, as that mission was called, was the beginning of having airplanes and ground troops work together. It was obviously an Allied airplane. You can tell that because of the circular markings. You see the what we would call roundels on there. And on the Allied side, they used that as a national marking. Different countries use different colors. And the Central Powers used a cross, a black cross. Of course, it has 2 wheels in the front. And one of the things, though, that's really challenging about these early World War I airplanes is they have no steering and they have no brakes. You have to actually steer with the rudder of the airplane, which steers it in the air, but it also steers it on the ground. So why is there no wheel on the back? What that is called a tail skid rather than a tail wheel. And these early airplanes used to fly off of grass fields, not hardtop, not like a road like today. And having that skid digging into the grass as it was taking off helped keep the airplane from wiggling around when it was on the ground. A wheel, it would be a little bit more difficult to control, but with this skid, dragging into the grass, it helped keep the airplane straight. So the look of this airplane is very much of the time in terms of its two wings and its wire bracing. As a combat airplane, it was one of the most important airplanes in World War I. More airplanes were shot down by the Allies with Sopwith Camels than any other airplane on the Allied side. Most of these airplanes were actually hand-built. They weren't assembly line like we have today. Each one was handcrafted and put together by a group of technicians who handmade all of the parts. So that was a lot of airplanes. The Camel also is interesting from World War I because of its engine. If you look at the front of the airplane, you'll see it has a round engine. But not only is the engine round, it actually spins. Most engines, the cylinders, the part of the engine that the pistons are in, doesn't move. But on these early airplanes, the whole engine spins with the propeller, and that's called a rotary engine. And the reason they did that was it was a way of getting a lot more horsepower, a lot more power out of the engine for a relatively lighter engine, and that was important in the early days of aviation. So this is a classic design of World War I, and this particular airplane was one of the most famous and important in World War I. You have any questions about it? How about you?
When you're sitting down, why is there a glass, like a square glass over it?
Another little detail on the airplane is what's called a windscreen. It's just like a windshield in your car, right? If you didn't have a windshield in your car and you're going 50 miles an hour, you'd be blown in your face and be pretty uncomfortable. Well, the same thing in an airplane. So that little windshield protects the pilot from the wind coming, but it also is a little bit of a protection about anything that would be flying out of the machine guns. Those machine gun shells would come out those chutes, but sometimes it may go awry, and that little screen would be there to protect you.
How fast does the Sopwith Camel fly?
The Sopwith Camel could actually fly about 115 miles an hour. That's airspeed. And that was a really fast airplane for the time. Doesn't sound very fast today, but in those days, the Sopwith Camel was one of the fastest airplanes.
All right. What's the one propeller on the right side for?
There's a tiny little propeller that you see on the right-hand side of the cockpit. Everybody thinks, well, gee, does that have something to do with propelling the airplane? Actually, what that's for is it moves a little pump that creates air pressure in the fuel tank. So it puts air pressure in the fuel tank to make the gas go to the engine more easily. In this airplane, the engine's way in front, and the gas tank is actually behind the pilot, right over here, underneath this cowling. So we needed a pump to make sure that the fuel would flow forward.
Why is there the open, hatch in the top wing?
Ah, okay. Look where the pilot sits, right? Right under the wing. So if there wasn't that cutout above the pilot and the pilot looked up, what would they see? They just see the bottom of the wing. But with that cutout there, they could see what's above them. Most importantly, they could see if there were enemy airplanes above them. So that's a way for the pilot to get better visibility.
What's that big thing that's suspended by wires in front of the pilot's view that looks like a big tooth?
Oh, the little teardrop shaped thing there? Yeah, if you look at the cockpit of the airplane, you see there's more of those brace wires, those metal wires, right? And there's a set of wires there in the front, and what that little piece does is stabilize those wires from vibrating, so it helps the pilot see better, because without that little streamlined piece, those wires would be doing this kind of thing in front of the pilot. So it keeps the wires from flying around. Yeah.
What would happen if the fuel tank was hit?
Well, of course, gasoline is a pretty explosive thing, and if it was hit by a bullet, it could catch fire. And in this airplane, that would be a pretty unhappy situation, because you've got the gas tank behind the pilot, which is then behind the engine. So you never would want that to happen, but it did happen in World War I. Sometimes, actually, even the engines would catch fire on their own because of the way they operated. Sometimes you would get some raw fuel, some unburned fuel that would get into the cowling, and that would catch fire. So flying in World War I was not only dangerous because people were shooting at you, just flying the airplanes was dangerous.
How many different types of airplanes would be in the war?
Well, there was lots of different designs, but one of the most important things that happened in World War I was the different types of airplanes that were built. I like to joke that before World War I, there were only two kinds of airplanes, ones that flew and ones that didn't. But by the end of World War I, you had different airplanes for different jobs. This one's a fighter airplane, a combat airplane, but you also had bomber airplanes, we also had ground attack airplanes, we also had reconnaissance or observation airplanes. So today, we have a different type of airplane to do all the different missions, and that was started in World War I.
You mentioned dogfighting. Do you want to talk about the famous dog in this plane?
Okay, well, dogfighting was the nickname for air-to-air combat when one airplane was trying to shoot down the other. Now, there was a very famous fictitious pilot who flew the Sopwith Camel. Does anybody know who that might be?
Snoopy.
Exactly right. Charlie Brown's pet beagle, Snoopy. And Snoopy would be a pilot flying his Sopwith Camel, taking on the very, very famous German pilot, the Red Baron, the most famous pilot in World War I, who had more aerial combat victories than any other pilot. But Snoopy wasn't afraid of that because he had a Sopwith Camel, and he was able to take on the Red Baron.
Peter, thank you so much for telling us all about the Sopwith Camel. We actually talked to a modern-day pilot who flies some pretty spectacular movements that probably originated around World War I. Check this out. Now I'm joined by pilot Patty Wagstaff, and you are an inductee to the National Aviation Hall of Fame. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks for being here.
What was it that got you interested in aerobatics?
You know, I think I saw an old movie when I was a little kid. I never went to an air show because I grew up overseas. There weren't any air shows where I lived. And but my dad was a pilot, and he'd done some, and I used to ask him when I was really young, what was it like? And he kind of downplayed it. But as soon as I could, as soon as I started flying, I went to an air show, and I knew right away that's what I wanted to do.
These maneuvers have a long history, beginning with World War I. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
All the basic aerobatic maneuvers, the roll, the loop, and the spin, were invented in World War I. So that's one of the reasons it's one of my favorite eras in aviation. And these maneuvers were invented out of necessity, trying to get the bad guys or the good guys, whichever side you're on, trying to get on their tail so you could shoot them or keep them in sight. So they were a lot of things in aviation were invented out of necessity, and so that's where aerobatics really came from.
So you could probably outfly a German pilot in World War I?
I'm sure I could have outflown a German pilot in World War I. I hope, anyway.
Thank you so much for joining us
today. You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I'm using virtual reality goggles to fly a World War I airplane, and that's what our friends are doing.
I don't think they had virtual reality goggles during World War I.
No, but we're using it to get into the cockpit.
Peter, they are watching a video from Old Rhinebeck, and it's flying a World War I airplane, and that was a little different flying than it is today. Can you tell us a little bit about how wonderful it was flying a World War I aircraft?
Well, today, of course, when you fly in an airplane, you're in an enclosed space, it's air-conditioned, you're not feeling any of the elements, it's a pretty comfortable experience. In World War I, the airplanes were completely open, you were exposed to the elements, the lubricant of the airplane would be spraying in your face, the airplane sometimes caught fire, and of course in combat, people were shooting at you. So it was a pretty challenging way to fly.
All right, guys, are we coming in for a bit of a landing? Looks like our friends are going to make it home safe.
We are safely back down on the ground. Nice job.
Peter, some of the tactics that were used in World War I are still being used today. Is that correct?
Yes, because we defined all those tactics in World War I, whether it was combat, air-to-air combat, or the use of airplanes for observation to see what was going on the ground, or bombing, or other sorts of missions. All of that was created in World War I, and in many ways, combat today is just like it was in World War I.
Beth and I actually got a chance to go out to the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and see modern military airplanes up close and personal. When we landed on the deck, we were going 100 miles an hour, and we stopped in 2 seconds.
And when we took off, we went from 0 to about 175 miles per hour in 3 seconds, and one of us screamed the entire way.
I do not possess the ability to do that without screaming a little bit. If you thought that was cool, you can see the cockpit video from F-18 launch off the deck of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower and our World War I video. Just head over to our Facebook page.
A little bit more about World War I. We can still see traces of it today. In fact, something you've probably already texted this afternoon can find its earliest origins in the Great War.
OMG.
The first known use of the expression OMG was in a telegram written in the midst of World War I by John Jackie Fisher, former First Sea Lord and Admiral in the Royal Navy. At this point in the war, he was serving as chairman of the government's Board of Invention and Resource. He sent the telegram to none other than Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Well, future Prime Minister. At that time, he was the newly appointed Minister of Munitions, and he looked a little younger. So next time you text OMG, remember it was coined by a former admiral to a future Prime Minister in a telegram from over 100 years ago.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. We want to thank Dr. Peter Jacob for joining us and all of our friends who played Europe, the United States, Japan, and our boat captain.
We want to tell everybody to join us 1 week from today on November 15th. We will have a live Q&A on Facebook with Dr. Peter Jacob. Send us all of your questions. Send them in on Facebook, on Twitter, even by Pigeon, and we will get as many of them answered as we possibly can.
And if you want to see the 360 video that we were looking at through the goggles, be sure to check out our Facebook page.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks for watching.
We have learned a lot about World War I today.
And while researching this show, we ran across...
Words are hard.
Stand by, quiet, and action, fight. Japan, you're looking. You're really worried. Woo! Woo! All right, good job. 1, 2, 3. Smoke comes in.
You look ridiculous.
Now I guess we have to fold up the map, huh?
I'm not folding.